Imagine lying on frozen wood, your breath turning to ice before your eyes, and the ocean's cold cutting deeper than any blade. No blankets, no coats, just skin, salt, and bone against the merciless sea. This was the reality of the sailors who faced not only storms and hunger, but a cold so relentless it claimed lives in silence. Today, we reveal the hidden truths, the brutal survival tricks, and the sacrifices of men who rewrote history while battling the ocean's most unforgiving enemy, its freezing embrace. When people imagine voyages like those of Vasco da Gama, Pedro Alvarez Cabral, or Ferdinand Magellan, they often picture tropical seas, blazing sun, and palm trees on distant shores. But that is only half the truth. The roots of Portuguese, Spanish, and later English and Dutch expeditions also cut through some of the coldest waters on Earth. The North Atlantic, near Brittany, Ireland, and the North Sea. The southern coast of Africa during harsh winters. The stormy South Atlantic, and for circumnavigators, the unforgiving tip of South America. These waters offered no mercy. And the cold at sea is unlike the chill of mountains or cities. It is wet, constant, invisible, and it seeps straight into the bones. On deck, there was no real shelter. The cramped, enclosed quarters were reserved for captains, officers, or precious cargo. Ordinary sailors slept exposed on the open deck, in damp holds among barrels, or in simple cloth hammocks when available. More often, they lay directly on the ship's floor with whatever rags they had to cover themselves. With frozen timbers underfoot and constant drafts, the cold became as much a companion as the salt and wind. Records from the era describe sailors with beards stiffened by ice, clothing frozen solid, fingers turning black, and bodies that hardened during the night, many never waking again. If you think the solution was warm coats, think again. Sailors' clothing varied by nation, wealth, and expedition, but it was generally made from the roughest, cheapest fabrics. Coarse wool was most common, patched, reused, or recycled, because unlike cotton or linen, it still offered some insulation even when wet. They wore loose shirts of linen or raw cotton, wrapped themselves in old cloaks, scraps of cloth, or animal hides. A curious but effective trick was to smear garments with animal fat, tallow, lard, or fish oil, creating a greasy barrier against water and wind. The downside? The stench, insects, and inevitable rot. But when the choice was between smelling foul or freezing to death, the answer was obvious. Proper boots were rare. Many wore crude leather sandals or simply bound their feet with cloth, making improvised thermal sacks. Hands were covered with stitched-together gloves when possible, or strips of fabric wrapped like bandages. As for the head, where much body heat escapes, sailors covered themselves with woolen caps, leather hats, or whatever rags they could tie around their heads and necks. Yet, despite all efforts, the cold often won. If you imagine ships of the Age of Discovery had some kind of heating system for their crews, dismiss the thought. Fire aboard a wooden vessel was almost unthinkable, a disaster waiting to happen. The only flames allowed were those of the kitchen, small, contained. Embers held in stone, sand, or iron boxes, usually in makeshift brick or ceramic stoves at the stern. This fire was strictly for cooking and often forbidden during storms, strong winds, or at night. So what did sailors have left? Just three sources of warmth. First, their own bodies. Men slept huddled together in groups, curled under sails, rags, or empty barrels, trying to share every bit of heat. Second, layering, piling on whatever scraps of clothing or fabric they had, since every extra layer mattered. And third, dry clothing, rare and precious, worth more than gold on the open sea. Whenever the skies cleared, sailors would lay out their soaked clothes to catch the wind or the rare sunlight, hoping to dry them before the next storm. To fight the cold from the inside, they drank whatever they had on hand: cheap wine, rum, brandy, or even vinegar mixed with water. But alcohol was a double-edged sword. It opened the blood vessels, tricking the body into feeling warm while actually draining heat faster. Many sailors drank heavily for comfort, only to never wake up the next morning. Now picture trying to sleep directly on a deck of wet wood, saturated with salt, whipped by wind, and stiff with frost as the night deepened. In waters like the North Atlantic or the passages near Antarctica, frost formed not only on the masts, but even in the sailors' hair and beards. The dampness was unrelenting, breeding sickness, lung infections, fungal diseases, scurvy, and mysterious fevers the men simply called the Great Chill. For some captains, the cold was a brutal test of endurance, and the death of a few sailors by hypothermia was seen almost as routine. Bodies replaced by new recruits at the next port. Harsh, but real. Eating well was already a challenge at sea. Eating in the cold was almost impossible. Most meals were hard biscuits, salted meat, and foul-smelling water stored in barrels. Hot food was rare. Only when the seas were calm, the firebox could be lit, and there was something left worth cooking. Their standard diet was little more than stone-hard ship's biscuits, salted or dried beef, pork or fish, dried beans and chickpeas, hard cheese, and weak wine or vinegar diluted in water to disinfect it. On better days, they managed thin stews made with beans, meat, or porridge from flour and oats. Yet the real power of hot food wasn't just calories. It was the warmth, a flicker of comfort against the endless cold. Sailors invented tricks to hold on to heat, tucking hot rations inside their clothes to keep warm through the day, sipping boiled water mixed with vinegar in small gulps through the night, or chewing cloves and ginger to stir their blood. Some even clung to superstitions, walking backwards after drinking broth, or holding an iron spoon while sleeping to absorb the ship's warmth. Strange, but when survival was at stake, nothing was dismissed. Cold was more than discomfort. It was a silent killer. Hypothermia crept in without warning. Shivers gave way to confusion. Sight blurred. Fingers froze, and within hours, the body shut down into a final sleep. Sailors were often found curled between barrels, as if still resting, beards glazed in ice, eyelids frozen shut. With no medicine, no blankets, and no time for ceremony, the dead were wrapped in cloth and slid into the ocean. The ships sailed on. The constant chill weakened bodies, opening the way for pneumonia, the deadliest of sea diseases, along with gangrene in fingers, ears, and toes, and mysterious ship fevers of pain and delirium. Some said it was a curse from the cold winds, others a punishment for leaving land. What is certain is that every voyage cost dozens of lives, and the survivors returned forever changed in body, mind, and soul, and spirit. And yet, despite the suffering, many endured. They carved the first global trade routes, not with technology, but with instinct, improvisation, and sheer resilience. They were not nobles, nor men whose names filled history books. They were anonymous sailors with cracked hands and bodies wrapped in rags, who braved the frozen oceans and reshaped the world. Telling their story matters, because it is built not only of pain and death, but also of silent courage. Today, we fight the cold with heaters, thick jackets, and feathered duvets. But for centuries, it was men like these who faced the freezing seas and opened the arteries of the modern world. Before you go, tell me, where in the world are you watching us from? Drop your country or city in the comments. I'd love to know where our crew is sailing to today.